Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Part 1. Early Life and Education of John Adams. The story of John Adams, a formidable architect of American independence, begins in the humble town of Braintree, Massachusetts, on October 30, 1735. Born into a modest family, Adams was the eldest son of John Adams Sr., a farmer and church deacon, and Susanna Boylston Adams, who came from a respected family in the colony. Adams's upbringing was deeply influenced by his father's dedication to community and hard work, as well as his mother's intellect and strong will. Raised with a Puritan ethic that emphasized hard work, duty, and discipline, young Adams absorbed values that would later shape his own character and career. From a young age, Adams was intellectually curious and eager to learn, but he initially felt reluctant to pursue academics with the same enthusiasm as his father had hoped. Despite showing potential, Adams considered abandoning his studies in favor of becoming a farmer like his father, finding books tedious and uninspiring. However, his father's insistence on the importance of education ultimately drove him to pursue higher learning. Adams attended a local school in Braintree, where he began to develop a passion for knowledge, particularly for the study of Latin and classical literature. These subjects were crucial to the curriculum, as they connected students with ideas from history's great thinkers, including Cicero, Plato, and Aristotle, who all became lifelong influences on Adams. In 1751, Adams enrolled at Harvard College, a prestigious institution that prepared young men for careers in ministry, law, and teaching. Harvard exposed him to the works of ancient philosophers and the principles of government, liberty, and justice, themes that would resonate throughout his life. During his time at Harvard, Adams was noted for his sharp intellect and outspoken nature, characteristics that made him both admired and, at times, controversial among his peers and professors. His graduation in 1755 marked the beginning of his journey as a scholar, though he was not yet aware of the monumental role he would one day play in shaping American history. Upon graduating, Adams struggled to find his true calling, initially taking a teaching job in Worcester, Massachusetts, to support himself financially. Although he found satisfaction in educating others, Adams felt he was meant for more than teaching in a small town. It was during this period that Adams became drawn to the study of law, viewing it as a profession that aligned with his strong sense of justice and his desire to contribute meaningfully to society. The legal field allowed him to combine his intellectual abilities with his passion for principles and governance, which was increasingly necessary as tensions between the colonies and Britain began to simmer. Adams's commitment to the study of law led him to apprentice under lawyer James Putnam, where he learned about British legal principles and colonial laws that governed Massachusetts. His legal training opened his eyes to the injustices imposed upon the colonies by British policies, igniting within him a fierce resolve to defend colonial rights. This period of study and early practice not only solidified his reputation as an astute lawyer, but also connected him with other like-minded individuals who would become influential figures in the fight for independence. The formative years of John Adams, shaped by a Puritan upbringing, rigorous education, and an unwavering commitment to justice, laid the foundation for a career that would define him as one of America's most principled leaders. These early influences prepared Adams for the challenges and moral dilemmas he would later face as a key figure in the struggle for independence. As the pressures between Britain and the colonies intensified, Adams's dedication to law, justice, and liberty positioned him to become one of the Revolution's most vital voices, advocating for a vision of America as a free and self-governing nation. Part 2. The Rise of a Lawyer and Patriot. After deciding to dedicate his life to law, John Adams returned to Braintree and established himself as a practicing lawyer. His knowledge and reputation grew as he handled cases that connected him with influential colonial leaders and exposed him to the complex relationship between the colonies and British rule. Adams's commitment to justice quickly set him apart, and he developed a strong reputation for integrity and skill in defending clients under difficult circumstances. Early on, his dedication to fairness led him to defend clients regardless of their popularity or position, reflecting his belief that justice was a fundamental right for all. This commitment would later define his approach as he navigated the turbulent waters of colonial resistance. In his early career, Adams's legal practice brought him into contact with cases that exposed the tightening grip of British policies on colonial life. Increasingly, the British government imposed taxes and restrictions to exert control over the colonies, which angered many colonial leaders. Adams observed how policies like the Navigation Acts limited economic freedom and gave Britain disproportionate control over trade, which severely impacted colonial merchants and farmers. These experiences sharpened Adams's awareness of how British rule constrained the natural rights of the colonies, fueling his desire to protect those rights. As tensions with Britain grew, the Stamp Act of 1765 marked a turning point for Adams and many of his contemporaries. The Stamp Act imposed a tax on paper goods, legal documents, and newspapers, sparking widespread resistance across the colonies. Adams found himself at the center of the resistance, writing essays and public letters that condemned the act as an unconstitutional overreach of British authority. In these writings, Adams argued that taxing the colonies without representation was a violation of their rights as British subjects, igniting public support and establishing him as a significant voice against British rule. Adams's writings gained traction and circulated widely, gaining him the attention of leaders in Massachusetts and beyond. His articulation of colonial grievances was both powerful and precise, as he argued that without representation in Parliament, the colonies had no obligation to submit to British-imposed taxes. These arguments placed him in the ranks of other emerging leaders, such as Samuel Adams and James Otis, who were similarly vocal about British oppression and the need for colonial autonomy. His conviction and eloquence positioned him as an essential figure in the growing movement for colonial rights and independence. The fight against the Stamp Act cemented Adams's transformation from a reserved lawyer into a passionate advocate for liberty. His newfound role in the movement brought him into the public eye, both celebrated and criticized for his radical stance. Adams was also known for his unwavering determination to balance the need for resistance with a commitment to justice, avoiding the extreme measures taken by some radical groups. He worked to channel the growing frustrations of his fellow colonists into constructive actions that could support lasting change, rather than acts of unchecked rebellion. Adams's courage during this period won him admiration among many, but it also brought new responsibilities and expectations. As colonial resistance intensified, he was called upon to participate in gatherings and debates, solidifying his reputation as a committed patriot with a deep-rooted belief in justice. His skill as an orator and writer proved essential as the colonies moved closer to open defiance against Britain. Each word he wrote and spoke strengthened the resolve of his fellow colonists, giving voice to their fears and aspirations in a time of unprecedented upheaval. By the end of this period, Adams had emerged as a respected lawyer and an outspoken critic of British policies, embodying the qualities of a patriot committed to defending colonial rights at any cost. This transformation set the stage for his active role in the independence movement, as Adams became increasingly convinced that the colonies could no longer coexist under British rule. His convictions would guide him through the coming years of intense political and personal trials, ultimately leading him to embrace the cause of independence as both a duty and a personal mission. Part 3. The Stamp Act Crisis and Adams's Response. The passing of the Stamp Act in 1765 was a watershed moment for the American colonies, sparking a firestorm of dissent that rippled through towns, cities, and colonies alike. To many colonists, including John Adams, the act symbolized an unjust and unconstitutional encroachment on their freedoms. The Stamp Act required colonists to purchase official stamps for every piece of printed paper, from legal documents to newspapers, infuriating individuals across different social and economic strata. For Adams, who viewed law as a sacred institution, the Stamp Act was a blatant violation of the principles of representation and justice that he held dear. Adams's response to the Stamp Act was both immediate and passionate. He took up his pen and wrote a series of essays under the title, A Dissertation on the Canon and Feudal Law. These essays argued that the Stamp Act was an infringement upon the natural rights of the colonists, positioning Adams as one of the earliest voices to publicly assert the colonies' rights to resist unjust laws. In these writings, Adams explored the historical roots of British oppression, tracing how power had historically been used to subjugate people under the guise of law. His arguments resonated widely, as he urged colonists to resist not out of hatred for Britain, but out of love for justice and liberty. Beyond his writing, Adams took a proactive stance by engaging with the Massachusetts Assembly, helping to shape the legislative response to the Stamp Act. His involvement in the Assembly allowed him to collaborate with other colonial leaders who were equally determined to push back against British overreach. This period marked his first real engagement in politics, as he worked to shape colonial responses that balanced reasoned protest with firm resistance. Adams's dedication to law and governance lent credibility to his arguments, encouraging others to see the need for organized and legal resistance rather than chaotic upheaval. When the Stamp Act took effect, colonial anger erupted into widespread protests and, in some cases, violent demonstrations. Adams, though a fierce opponent of the Stamp Act, advocated for a peaceful but firm approach, urging his fellow colonists to consider the long-term impact of their actions. His stance illustrated his belief that justice and law, rather than mob violence, would be the foundation of a free America. His careful balance between resistance and restraint set him apart from more radical figures, positioning him as a leader capable of tempering revolutionary zeal with reasoned strategy. As the protests intensified, the British government found itself under pressure and eventually repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. While the repeal was celebrated as a victory across the colonies, Adams and other leaders understood that this was only a temporary relief. The repeal demonstrated that colonial resistance could yield results, but it also foreshadowed the inevitability of future conflicts. For Adams, the experience reinforced his belief that the colonies would ultimately need to sever ties with Britain to secure lasting freedom and self-governance. The Stamp Act crisis fundamentally shaped Adams's views on colonial rights and solidified his position as a patriot willing to defend those rights at all costs. This period also deepened his conviction that independence would one day be necessary, as he saw firsthand the lengths to which Britain would go to control its colonies. His response to the Stamp Act set the foundation for his future role as a leading advocate for American independence, as he continued to develop his ideas on governance, liberty, and justice. The seeds of revolution were taking root, and Adams was prepared to nurture them as a dedicated, principled leader in the fight for freedom. Part 4. A reluctant leader enters politics. As resistance to British policies grew, John Adams found himself increasingly drawn into the political fray, though not without some reluctance. Known for his honesty and intellectual rigor, Adams was respected in Massachusetts as a skilled lawyer and a principled man. Despite this growing recognition, he was wary of entering politics, which he associated with ambition and corruption. However, as he witnessed the colonial response to British policies and the injustices inflicted upon the colonies, Adams's sense of duty overtook his hesitation. He came to see political involvement as necessary to safeguard the rights and liberties he cherished. Adams's official entry into politics came when he was appointed to the Massachusetts Assembly, where he joined other leaders committed to opposing British rule. His experiences as a lawyer and his dedication to justice made him a natural choice to represent the colony's interests. In the Assembly, Adams gained exposure to the complexities of legislative work, as well as the broader issues of governance that would define the colony's struggle for autonomy. This exposure deepened his understanding of the British government's tactics, as well as the necessity of colonial unity in the face of oppression. Around this time, Adams became more deeply involved with the Sons of Liberty, a group of patriots dedicated to resisting British rule. Though he was not a radical by nature, he supported their efforts to fight unjust policies through organized protest and public dissent. Adams believed that open defiance, tempered by reason, was essential to building a movement grounded in principles rather than in chaos. His alignment with this group brought him closer to figures like Samuel Adams and James Otis, who shared his commitment to defending colonial rights, and together, they worked to foster a spirit of resilience across Massachusetts. Despite his growing political involvement, Adams faced internal conflict. His diary entries from this period reveal a man wrestling with the demands of public life, which conflicted with his natural desire for privacy and personal study. Adams's heart lay in intellectual pursuits and the law, yet his dedication to justice compelled him to act. This inner conflict defined his early political career, as he sought to balance personal ideals with the responsibility he felt to his fellow colonists. His wife, Abigail Adams, a steadfast and insightful partner, encouraged him to continue, understanding the importance of his contributions to the colonial cause. As Adams became more visible, his reputation as an eloquent and thoughtful advocate for the colonies grew. His speeches and writings resonated with people, articulating a vision of a society where the rule of law protected individual freedoms and where governance was grounded in moral principles. Adams's influence spread beyond Massachusetts, as his essays and letters were widely read and admired throughout the colonies. Through these writings, he voiced concerns that many colonists shared but lacked the means or confidence to express. His ability to give voice to these unspoken fears strengthened the unity of the movement. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, Adams's political involvement placed him in a unique position to influence the direction of the resistance. He understood the necessity of collaboration and worked tirelessly to forge alliances with other colonial leaders, helping to lay the groundwork for what would eventually become a unified quest for independence. His reluctance to enter politics had gradually transformed into a steadfast commitment, driven by a sense of purpose he could not ignore. Adams had come to see that only through political action could the colonies achieve the liberty and justice he so deeply valued. Adams's early political career was characterized by his unwavering belief in justice and his skepticism of unchecked power. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he feared the dangers of mob rule as much as he opposed British tyranny, and he called for a movement grounded in legal and moral principles. His insistence on a balanced, principled approach set him apart as a leader, allowing him to navigate the challenges of the time with a clarity that inspired others. Through his work in the Massachusetts Assembly, his advocacy in legal matters, and his growing role in the colonial resistance, Adams's journey from reluctant participant to dedicated patriot was complete. This transformation would prepare him for the challenges he would soon face on a much larger stage, as one of the foremost voices in the quest for American independence. Part 5. The Boston Massacre Trials. One of the most defining moments in John Adams's career, and a turning point in his journey as a patriot, came with the Boston Massacre Trials in 1770. This incident, where British soldiers fired upon a crowd of colonists, killing 5 and wounding others, ignited widespread outrage throughout the colonies. Public sentiment turned sharply against the British soldiers, and the people of Boston demanded justice for the fallen. Despite the intense anger in the city and his own support for the colonial cause, Adams believed that everyone, even the accused soldiers, deserved a fair trial. This commitment to justice led him to take on the unpopular task of defending the soldiers in court. Adams's decision to defend the British soldiers was met with widespread criticism and suspicion. Many viewed his choice as a betrayal of the colonial cause, and some feared that his reputation would be irreparably damaged. However, Adams stood firm, driven by his belief in the principle that all individuals were entitled to legal representation and a fair trial, regardless of public opinion. He saw this case as a chance to demonstrate that colonial society could uphold justice even amid political turmoil. His willingness to uphold these principles, despite personal risk, would later define his character as a leader of integrity. The trial itself was tense and highly charged, as emotions in Boston were still raw from the tragedy. Adams faced an uphill battle in convincing a colonial jury to consider the case impartially, given the prevailing anger toward British authorities. In his arguments, Adams emphasized that the soldiers had acted in self-defense, trying to defuse an escalating situation rather than to provoke violence. He famously argued that facts are stubborn things, urging the jury to set aside their emotions and focus solely on the evidence presented before them. Adams's defense was a brilliant display of his legal acumen and dedication to the rule of law. He argued that justice required fairness, not vengeance, and he meticulously dismantled the prosecution's case, ultimately swaying the jury. The court found 6 of the soldiers not guilty and convicted 2 of lesser charges, a verdict that shocked some but ultimately demonstrated the strength of the colonial legal system. Adams's role in securing a fair trial, even for despised adversaries, earned him both admiration and criticism, but it solidified his reputation as a man of integrity and principle. The Boston Massacre Trials had a profound effect on Adams, shaping his approach to both law and politics in the coming years. He saw how volatile public sentiment could be manipulated, and he became more cautious of political movements that appealed to raw emotion without restraint. This experience reinforced his belief that justice and rational governance were essential foundations for a free society. Although he defended British soldiers, Adams emerged from the trials even more convinced of the need for independence, understanding that British control posed a long-term threat to justice in the colonies. In the aftermath of the trial, Adams was both celebrated and scrutinized. Some colonists saw his actions as proof of his commitment to fairness, while others continued to question his loyalty to the cause of independence. However, Adams remained undeterred, recognizing that his duty to justice transcended the immediate passions of the crowd. His involvement in the trials not only strengthened his resolve to fight for independence but also revealed his dedication to establishing a system where law, not mob sentiment, would prevail. This episode illustrated Adams's rare ability to balance his commitment to justice with his patriotic fervor, a trait that would serve him well in the years to come as he took on greater responsibilities in the fight for independence. The Boston Massacre Trials were a turning point for John Adams, providing a crucial lesson in the importance of integrity and fairness. His role in these cases exemplified the kind of leader he would become, a patriot guided by principles, even when they put him at odds with popular opinion. This experience solidified Adams's place as a defender of colonial rights who also respected the rule of law, and it foreshadowed his future as a leader in the quest for a fair and just republic. Part 6. Building the Case for Independence. Following the Boston Massacre Trials, John Adams's role in the colonial resistance became more active and focused. With the repeal of the Stamp Act and the lingering tension from the Boston Massacre, it was clear that British rule over the colonies remained deeply fraught. For Adams, these events demonstrated that the colonies' grievances would not be resolved through petitions or half measures. He increasingly felt that only full independence would secure the natural rights and freedoms of the American people. Adams's legal background and his personal experiences had convinced him that the British government could no longer govern the colonies fairly or justly. As tensions escalated, Adams's writings took on an urgent tone, and he published numerous essays and letters that called for decisive action. His ability to articulate complex legal and moral arguments made him a powerful voice among the colonial leadership. He often framed the struggle as one not only for independence but also for the preservation of justice and moral integrity. By defining independence as a matter of principle, he inspired colonists to see their resistance as a moral duty rather than mere rebellion. His words resonated widely, helping to build a foundation of support for the idea of a free and self-governing America. In 1774, Adams was appointed as a delegate to the First Continental Congress, a gathering of colonial leaders aimed at addressing grievances against British policies. Although there was initial disagreement among delegates about the extent of their resistance, Adams quickly emerged as one of the more outspoken voices in favor of preparing for eventual independence. In Philadelphia, he met with influential figures from other colonies, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, whose perspectives broadened his understanding of the national scope of the movement. Through collaboration with these leaders, Adams worked to foster a unified vision for the colonies, a crucial step in the journey toward independence. During these early meetings, Adams argued forcefully for the rights of the colonies to self-governance and self-determination. His speeches and debates often centered on the concept of natural rights, a philosophy that every individual has fundamental rights that should not be violated by any government. Adams's belief in these principles laid the intellectual groundwork for the arguments that would later form the basis of the Declaration of Independence. His passion and conviction in these debates won him the respect of his peers, as well as a reputation as one of the most ardent defenders of colonial freedom. The Continental Congress also provided Adams with the opportunity to discuss and debate possible forms of government that might replace British rule. Drawing from his knowledge of classical philosophy and legal principles, Adams became a proponent of a republic, where power would be derived from the people rather than a monarchy. His vision for a government based on checks and balances influenced many of the ideas that would later be incorporated into the American Constitution. Adams understood that the colonies needed not only to achieve independence but also to lay the foundation for a stable and just government. This vision became a central part of his contribution to the independence movement. As discussions in Congress continued, Adams worked tirelessly to convince others that British rule was not merely inconvenient but an existential threat to colonial liberties. He urged the colonies to prepare for war if necessary, arguing that peaceful measures had failed to secure their rights. By 1775, following skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, the colonies were effectively at war with Britain, and Adams was among those calling for a clear and decisive break. He saw the war as a painful but necessary struggle, one that would ultimately be justified by the creation of a free and fair nation. His unwavering commitment to the cause, combined with his legal expertise, established him as a leader capable of guiding the colonies through the coming trials. Adams's role in the Continental Congress and his work to unify colonial leaders behind the cause of independence solidified his position as one of the foremost advocates for freedom. His belief that independence was inevitable, combined with his vision of a republic governed by laws, inspired many of his contemporaries. These early efforts in Congress laid the groundwork for the Declaration of Independence, as Adams continued to shape the course of the Revolution and the emerging nation. His efforts marked a pivotal shift in the colony's approach, from seeking reform to pursuing outright independence, as he tirelessly advocated for a future defined by liberty and justice. Part 7. Drafting the Declaration of Independence. In 1776, as the conflict with Britain intensified, John Adams's call for independence found its ultimate expression in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. Adams, alongside Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, was appointed to the Committee of Five, tasked with drafting a formal declaration that would articulate the colony's desire to separate from Britain. Adams's legal and philosophical insights proved invaluable in shaping the document, although he ultimately recommended that Thomas Jefferson take the lead in writing the initial draft. Adams recognized Jefferson's skill as a writer, and he believed that his eloquence would serve the revolutionary cause well. Throughout the drafting process, Adams provided critical input and guidance, drawing upon his extensive knowledge of law, history, and philosophy. His influence helped shape the Declaration's emphasis on natural rights, justice, and self-determination, principles that he had championed throughout his career. Adams's own writings and speeches had consistently stressed the idea that government must be based on the consent of the governed and that any authority infringing upon individual liberties was illegitimate. These beliefs were woven into the Declaration's language, affirming the colony's right to self-governance and independence. The Declaration of Independence, approved by Congress on July 4, 1776, was a powerful statement of the colony's resolve. Adams viewed the document not merely as a statement of rebellion, but as a blueprint for a new kind of nation grounded in principles of equality and freedom. He believed that this declaration would resonate far beyond American shores, inspiring others to challenge tyranny and embrace the ideals of liberty. For Adams, the Declaration marked the culmination of years of dedication to the cause of justice and the beginning of a new chapter in human history. It was a profound achievement that underscored his role as a key architect of American independence. Despite the triumph of the Declaration, Adams understood that the work of securing independence was far from over. The colonies now faced the daunting task of building and defending a new nation, and Adams was committed to seeing the struggle through to the end. He continued to play a central role in Congress, advocating for measures that would strengthen the colony's military and diplomatic positions. His focus remained on ensuring that the ideals outlined in the Declaration would be protected, even as the realities of war presented formidable challenges. Adams's determination to see these ideals realized exemplified his unwavering commitment to the Revolution's ultimate goals. In the years following the Declaration, Adams also worked to build international support for the American cause. Recognizing that alliances with European powers, especially France, were crucial to sustaining the war effort, Adams advocated for diplomacy as an essential component of the struggle. His understanding of European politics and his diplomatic instincts positioned him to help secure vital support that would ultimately contribute to the American victory. Adams saw these alliances as a means to reinforce the principles of the Declaration of Independence on a global scale, showcasing America's commitment to liberty. The Declaration of Independence remains one of Adams's most enduring legacies, representing the ideals that he championed throughout his life. Though he did not write the document alone, his contributions and guidance were instrumental in framing the colony's cause in terms of universal rights and freedoms. This declaration became a symbol of hope and a foundation upon which the United States would be built. For Adams, it was both a personal victory and a testament to the values he held dear, a vision of a nation where every individual could live freely and pursue happiness under the protection of just laws. The adoption of the Declaration of Independence was a momentous achievement, and Adams understood the profound responsibility it carried. As he looked toward the future, he was resolute in his belief that the values embedded in the Declaration must guide the new nation in all its endeavors. His work on this historic document marked a turning point, both in his career and in the history of the American colonies, solidifying his role as a visionary leader in the quest for freedom and justice. Part 8. Diplomat in Europe. With the Declaration of Independence signed, the young nation faced a new and immediate challenge: sustaining a war against one of the world's most powerful empires. John Adams recognized that victory against Britain would require more than just military resilience. It would demand financial support, resources, and formal alliances with European powers. In 1778, Adams was appointed as an American diplomat to Europe, tasked with securing alliances and financial assistance for the Revolutionary War. This mission was complex, as Europe was a politically turbulent landscape, with shifting alliances and deeply entrenched interests. Adams's knowledge of European history and his strategic instincts made him an ideal candidate to represent American interests abroad. Adams's primary destination was France, where Benjamin Franklin had already established a presence as a diplomat. France had long been Britain's rival, and Adams hoped to build upon Franklin's work by strengthening French support for the American cause. Upon arrival, however, Adams found himself frustrated by the political culture he encountered in the French court. Franklin's charismatic and informal style had made him popular among the French aristocracy, but Adams struggled with the slower, more social approach to diplomacy favored in France. His own straightforward, practical manner often clashed with the nuanced, courtly environment, and he found it challenging to adjust to the complexities of French diplomacy. Despite these challenges, Adams worked tirelessly to promote the American cause, meeting with French officials and advocating for increased support. His efforts were rewarded when, in 1778, France signed a formal alliance with the United States, committing to provide military assistance and financial resources. This alliance marked a turning point in the Revolutionary War, bolstering American forces and shifting the balance of power. While Franklin received much of the public credit for securing French support, Adams's contributions were essential in maintaining and expanding this critical partnership. His persistence and focus on practical outcomes helped solidify the French-American alliance, which would prove decisive in the war's outcome. In 1780, Adams was dispatched to the Dutch Republic to secure additional loans and support. Unlike France, the Netherlands was not as motivated by rivalry with Britain and required careful diplomatic negotiations. Adams arrived in Amsterdam, facing a financial market wary of investing in the American cause, which was still seen as a risky venture. Undeterred, Adams employed his understanding of Dutch banking and economic principles, presenting a compelling case for supporting the American Revolution as an investment in future stability and trade opportunities. He met with Dutch bankers, government officials, and merchants, slowly building a network of allies who saw value in America's independence. Adams's work in the Netherlands culminated in a major diplomatic success in 1782, when he convinced the Dutch government to formally recognize the United States as an independent nation. This recognition was monumental, marking the first time a neutral European power formally acknowledged American sovereignty. With Dutch recognition secured, Adams was able to negotiate critical loans that provided desperately needed funds for the American war effort. These loans not only helped sustain the military but also established a foundation for future economic relations between the United States and the Netherlands. Adams's success in the Netherlands demonstrated his tenacity and skill in diplomacy, as he achieved what many had thought impossible in a neutral, cautious nation. During this time, Adams also worked to secure a preliminary peace with Britain. He participated in the negotiations that would eventually lead to the Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the Revolutionary War and recognized the United States as an independent nation. Although his diplomatic style sometimes clashed with those of his fellow negotiators, particularly the more reserved Franklin, Adams's direct approach ensured that American interests were firmly represented. His insistence on fair terms and his focus on long-term sovereignty helped shape the final treaty, laying the groundwork for the United States' place in the international community. John Adams's diplomatic efforts in Europe were instrumental in securing the resources, alliances, and recognition that ultimately enabled the United States to achieve independence. Though often overshadowed by Franklin's popularity in France, Adams's contributions were vital to sustaining the revolutionary cause and establishing America's international standing. His success in the Netherlands, his perseverance in the face of diplomatic challenges, and his role in negotiating peace with Britain marked a defining chapter in his career and showcased his commitment to building a lasting, sovereign nation. These experiences abroad strengthened his resolve and broadened his perspective, equipping him with insights that he would later bring to his role in shaping the new republic. By the time he returned to America in 1788, Adams had secured invaluable international support that would help stabilize the young nation's economy and position it for future growth. His time in Europe left him with a deep understanding of the global dynamics that would influence American policy for years to come. As he prepared to rejoin the political landscape in America, Adams was more determined than ever to ensure that the principles of independence and justice remained central to the nation's governance. Part 9. The Struggle for a Strong Federal Government. Following his return from Europe, John Adams found himself once again drawn into the political sphere as the newly independent United States grappled with defining its form of government. The fledgling nation was governed under the Articles of Confederation, a framework that granted significant autonomy to individual states but limited the powers of the central government. Adams, who had witnessed the value of unity and strong leadership during the war, grew concerned that the Articles of Confederation left the nation vulnerable to internal division and foreign influence. He believed that without a robust federal structure, the liberties fought for during the Revolution would be difficult to maintain. His observations from Europe reinforced his view that only a unified, well-organized government could effectively safeguard the new nation's independence. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Although Adams did not attend the convention himself, he actively corresponded with several delegates, sharing his thoughts on governance and the need for a balanced, structured republic. He had long believed in a system of checks and balances to prevent any single branch of government from gaining excessive power, a principle that would become central to the new U.S. Constitution. Adams's earlier work on state constitutions, particularly in Massachusetts, had already introduced these concepts, and his ideas greatly influenced the structure of the federal government being proposed. Adams's writings on government, particularly his publication A Defense of the Constitutions of Government of the United States of America, articulated his vision for a balanced republic. In this work, Adams argued for a separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, a system designed to prevent the abuses of tyranny he had seen in monarchies and unchecked governments. He believed that a mixed government, combining elements of democracy, aristocracy, and a strong executive, would create stability while protecting individual rights. His defense of these ideas contributed to the growing support for a federal system and helped lay the philosophical foundation for the Constitution. When the U.S. Constitution was finally ratified in 1788, Adams saw it as a triumph for the principles he had long championed. He believed the Constitution struck the right balance between empowering the federal government and preserving state and individual rights. Although he had reservations about certain aspects of the document, Adams was confident that the new framework would provide the stability and protection necessary to guide the young nation forward. His influence on the Constitution, though indirect, was deeply felt, as many of his ideas about governance and balance had been adopted and embedded within its structure. With the Constitution in place, the newly formed government moved quickly to establish itself, and Adams was elected as the nation's first vice president under George Washington. While his role as vice president initially seemed minor, Adams viewed it as an opportunity to contribute to the shaping of the new government from within. His role in the Senate allowed him to cast tie-breaking votes and influence early legislative decisions, and he quickly became an advocate for policies that would strengthen the federal government. This position, though frustrating at times due to its limited powers, allowed him to witness firsthand the challenges and debates that would define the nation's formative years. Adams's commitment to a strong central government would later shape his approach as president. He was steadfast in his belief that only through unity and a solid federal structure could the United States survive and thrive on the world stage. His experiences during the struggle for independence, his time in Europe, and his understanding of political philosophy all reinforced his conviction that a balanced, organized republic was essential to protect the liberties of its citizens. As vice president, Adams laid the groundwork for his future presidency, continuing to promote his vision of a unified, enduring nation based on justice, stability, and strength. Part 10. The Vice Presidency and Early Challenges. As the United States' first vice president, John Adams faced unique challenges in defining his role. The Constitution provided little guidance on the duties of the vice president, aside from presiding over the Senate and casting tie-breaking votes. For Adams, this lack of clarity was frustrating. He had long envisioned himself as an active participant in shaping the new government, yet the vice presidency offered limited opportunities to influence policy directly. Despite this, Adams approached the role with a sense of duty and determination, seeing it as a way to support President George Washington and ensure the stability of the young nation. In the Senate, Adams found himself in a delicate position, often serving as a mediator between opposing factions. Although he could not initiate legislation, he took his responsibilities seriously, casting nearly 30 tie-breaking votes during his 8-year tenure. His votes reflected his commitment to a strong central government, supporting measures that would help unify the states under a cohesive federal structure. This experience in the Senate deepened Adams's understanding of the emerging political divisions within the country, and he grew increasingly concerned about the potential for factionalism to undermine the nation's stability. He saw these divisions as threats to the principles of unity and shared purpose he had worked so hard to promote. Adams's vice presidency unfolded against the backdrop of growing political tensions between the emerging Federalist and Democratic-Republican parties. As a Federalist, Adams generally aligned himself with those who favored a robust central government and a close relationship with Britain, particularly in trade and diplomacy. However, the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, advocated for stronger state rights and a more agrarian-based society with closer ties to France. These conflicting visions for the young nation created frequent debates within Washington's administration, and Adams often found himself caught between the president's neutral stance and the increasingly polarized viewpoints around him. Despite the frustrations of his role, Adams developed a deep respect for Washington's leadership style and judgment. Observing Washington's commitment to neutrality and his ability to remain above factional infighting, Adams began to appreciate the importance of restraint and patience in executive leadership. Washington's approach to foreign policy, particularly his decision to avoid entanglement in European conflicts, also influenced Adams's views on the need for caution in international affairs. These lessons would shape Adams's own presidential policies, as he recognized the value of maintaining stability and avoiding unnecessary conflicts that could jeopardize the nation's security. The vice presidency was not without its personal challenges for Adams. Separated from his beloved wife, Abigail, for long periods due to his duties in the capital, Adams relied heavily on their correspondence for support and advice. Abigail's letters offered not only companionship but also insightful political counsel, and she became his most trusted confidant. Her observations and reflections on the political climate helped Adams navigate the complexities of his position and provided a sense of grounding during the often isolating experience of the vice presidency. Their partnership and mutual respect would continue to be a source of strength and guidance for Adams throughout his political career. One of the most challenging aspects of Adams's vice presidency was his growing rivalry with Thomas Jefferson. Although the two men had once been close allies in the fight for independence, their ideological differences grew more pronounced over time. Jefferson, who served as Secretary of State, increasingly opposed the Federalist policies that Adams supported, and their once friendly relationship became strained. This division foreshadowed the political conflicts that would define Adams's presidency, as he would later face opposition from Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans on a national stage. Despite their differences, Adams respected Jefferson's intellect and dedication to the country, though he lamented the growing partisan divide. Adams's years as vice president taught him valuable lessons about governance, compromise, and the importance of preserving the Union. While the limitations of the role often frustrated him, he used his time in the Senate to advocate for policies that would strengthen the federal government and support Washington's efforts to unify the nation. His experience navigating the early partisan conflicts and observing Washington's leadership style prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. As he prepared to transition to the presidency, Adams was acutely aware of the difficulties he would face in leading a divided nation and maintaining the stability he believed was essential for the survival of the United States. By the end of his tenure as vice president, Adams had grown both weary and wise. He understood that the path forward would not be easy, and he knew that his vision of a strong, united republic would face opposition. Nonetheless, he remained steadfast in his commitment to the ideals of independence, justice, and balanced governance. His time in office, though often challenging, had strengthened his resolve and prepared him to take on the responsibilities of the presidency. Adams's experience as vice president, marked by both frustration and growth, set the stage for a presidency defined by complex decisions and fierce determination. Part 11. The Election of 1796 and the Rise of Partisan Politics. The election of 1796 marked a historic moment in American democracy, the first contested presidential election in the United States. With George Washington stepping down after 2 terms, the young nation faced the challenge of selecting its next leader from competing candidates rather than rallying around a single, unanimously supported figure. John Adams, who had served as vice president for 8 years, emerged as the leading candidate for the Federalist Party, while Thomas Jefferson represented the Democratic-Republican Party, a group that promoted more power for individual states and closer ties with France. This election not only tested the new democratic system but also exposed the growing ideological rift between the two political factions. For Adams, the election was an opportunity to secure a future for his vision of a strong, united republic, even as the nation grew increasingly divided. The Federalist Party, which Adams led, advocated for a powerful central government, economic growth through industry, and closer ties with Britain. Federalists believed that a robust federal structure was essential to the survival and prosperity of the United States, and they saw Britain's stable government as a model of balanced governance. The Democratic Republicans, however, strongly opposed these ideals. Led by Jefferson, they promoted a decentralized government that gave states more autonomy and emphasized agrarian values over industrial growth. Democratic Republicans were deeply influenced by the ideals of the French Revolution, which they saw as a fight for liberty, while the Federalists were increasingly wary of the Revolution's radicalism and instability. This ideological divide between Federalists and Democratic Republicans defined the campaign, creating a clear choice between Adams's commitment to unity through strong federal governance and Jefferson's emphasis on individual freedoms and state sovereignty. As the campaign unfolded, it quickly became one of the most contentious in the nation's short history. Adams and Jefferson, who had once been allies during the Revolution, found themselves at the center of fierce partisan attacks from supporters on both sides. Federalist newspapers accused Jefferson of being overly sympathetic to the French Revolution and a potential threat to American stability. They painted him as an extremist who would dismantle the young nation's structure and usher in chaos similar to what was unfolding in France. Democratic-Republican supporters, meanwhile, portrayed Adams as a monarchist at heart, accusing him of favoring British-style rule and viewing him as disconnected from the common people. These personal and ideological attacks reflected the extent to which partisan divisions had taken hold, and they foreshadowed the challenges Adams would face as president. The election outcome revealed the deep and growing political divide within the United States. Adams won by a narrow margin, securing 71 electoral votes to Jefferson's 68, which led to an unusual outcome under the electoral system of the time. Adams became president, while Jefferson, as the runner-up, became vice president. This arrangement placed two men with fundamentally different political visions and beliefs in the two highest offices of the government. For Adams, the prospect of working alongside Jefferson as his vice president presented both a challenge and an opportunity to bridge the growing partisan divide. He hoped that their shared commitment to the Republic's ideals might allow them to collaborate, even if they disagreed on the details of governance. However, the ideological differences between Adams and Jefferson would soon prove to be a persistent and defining feature of his presidency. The 1796 election underscored the emergence of partisanship as a powerful force in American politics. For Adams, the election was not only a personal victory but also a moment that solidified his role as a statesman tasked with navigating an increasingly divided political landscape. The experience confirmed his belief that only a strong, united central government could preserve the independence and stability of the new nation. Adams was deeply aware of the weight of his position and the challenges that lay ahead. He approached his presidency determined to overcome partisan strife and to guide the country forward, upholding the principles of unity and justice that had defined his life's work. The election of 1796 thus set the stage for Adams's presidency, foreshadowing both the achievements and difficulties he would encounter in office. The narrow victory revealed that America was already experiencing the pull of factionalism, a development Adams feared could weaken the nation. As he prepared to assume the presidency, Adams resolved to bridge these divisions and strengthen the government he had fought so hard to establish. His journey from vice president to president marked a new chapter in his dedication to the American Republic and his belief in its capacity to endure, despite the challenges posed by partisan politics and ideological rifts. Part 12. Adams's Presidency and the Quasi-War with France. John Adams's presidency began with a sense of responsibility that was at once daunting and critical for the future of the United States. Having narrowly won the election of 1796, Adams was now tasked with uniting a country that was deeply divided along partisan lines. The early days of his administration, however, were marked by an escalating international crisis that would shape his presidency: the Quasi-War with France. Tensions between the United States and France had been rising for several years, particularly over the French Revolution and the United States' decision to remain neutral in the conflict between France and Britain. The French, angered by the American decision to align with Britain through the Jay Treaty, began to seize American merchant ships that were trading with Britain. In response, President Adams was faced with the difficult decision of how to respond to this threat without plunging the nation into a full-scale war. Adams, though a Federalist who supported a strong military, had long believed in the importance of neutrality and diplomacy. He did not want to risk the fragile peace that had been so hard won during the Revolutionary War, especially with the nation's military still in a nascent state. Instead of immediately declaring war, Adams chose a diplomatic approach, hoping to resolve the conflict through negotiation and to preserve America's fragile standing in the international community. His decision, however, faced sharp criticism from his own party, as many Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, pushed for military action against France. Hamilton and others in the Federalist camp were eager to retaliate, seeing war as an opportunity to solidify the United States' position on the global stage and secure more favorable terms with Britain. This pressure from within his own party placed Adams in a precarious position, torn between maintaining his commitment to peace and appeasing the more hawkish elements of his administration. In 1798, Adams took a bold step by sending a diplomatic mission to France, hoping to open negotiations and avoid war. The mission was a failure, and the French response to American overtures only worsened the situation. The French government, led by Napoleon Bonaparte's agents, refused to meet with the American diplomats unless they paid bribes, a scandalous demand that became known as the XYZ Affair. This insult to American dignity provoked widespread public outrage, and the Federalist-controlled Congress began preparing for potential war with France. The public was stirred by the affair, and many Americans rallied behind the idea of taking a strong stand against France, seeing it as an affront to national honor. Despite the mounting pressure for war, Adams remained determined to avoid conflict, recognizing the long-term dangers it would pose to the young nation. In 1798, Adams authorized the creation of a peacetime navy, marking the beginning of what would come to be known as the Quasi-War, a series of naval skirmishes between American and French forces in the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean. Though never an official declaration of war, the Quasi-War allowed Adams to strengthen the U.S. military without crossing the threshold into a full-scale conflict. The naval conflict was a series of limited engagements, with American ships defending American merchant vessels from French privateers and retaliating against French warships that had been harassing American interests. Under the leadership of John Adams, the U.S. Navy grew in strength and prestige, signaling the nation's growing military capability, but without the disastrous consequences of a formal war. Adams's decision to pursue diplomacy over military conflict in the Quasi-War, while it earned him praise from some quarters, also fueled dissatisfaction within his own party. Many Federalists were frustrated by his cautious approach, and some even began to question his commitment to a strong and aggressive foreign policy. The situation reached a breaking point when Adams, still committed to peace, took the unprecedented step of halting negotiations for war, despite the public outcry against France. His decision to de-escalate the crisis and seek peace was a critical moment in his presidency, one that demonstrated his leadership and vision for the United States as a nation that sought to avoid unnecessary conflict. Adams's actions in this period were emblematic of his belief in the long-term survival of the Republic, and he often expressed the view that the United States should not be drawn into foreign entanglements that would divert its focus from its domestic priorities. The Quasi-War ended in 1800 with the Treaty of Mortefontaine, which restored peace between the United States and France. Although the conflict had been limited in scope, it had tested the resolve and leadership of President Adams, forcing him to balance the pressures of partisan expectations, national security, and his own vision for America's future in a world dominated by European powers. The conclusion of the Quasi-War marked a key moment in Adams's presidency, showing that his preference for diplomacy and restraint was more than just a political stance. It was a core element of his vision for a stable and independent nation. In the years that followed, Adams's decision to avoid war with France was met with a mixed legacy. Some historians praise him for his diplomacy and foresight in avoiding a potentially disastrous conflict, while others criticize him for failing to rally the nation to the cause of war when it seemed the right option politically. What remains undeniable is that Adams's leadership during this crisis illustrated his willingness to make difficult decisions based on what he believed was best for the long-term health of the Republic. His refusal to bow to political pressure and his pursuit of peace rather than war helped to ensure that the United States emerged from the Quasi-War stronger, more confident, and firmly committed to maintaining its independence on the world stage. As Adams's presidency continued, the Quasi-War would remain one of his defining legacies, an example of his commitment to diplomacy, peace, and national sovereignty in an increasingly dangerous world. Though his decision to avoid war was not universally applauded, it set the tone for the United States foreign policy in the years to come, influencing the direction of American diplomacy for generations. Part 13. The Alien and Sedition Acts, a Controversial Legacy. In the midst of the international tensions of the late 1790s, John Adams faced growing domestic unrest and internal threats that led to one of the most controversial chapters of his presidency, the passing of the Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws, which Adams reluctantly signed into law, were designed to bolster national security during a period of heightened fear of French influence and domestic subversion. However, they also raised significant questions about civil liberties and the limits of government power, casting a long shadow over Adams's legacy. The United States, still young and fragile, was embroiled in a volatile international environment. The Quasi-War with France had stirred public anxiety about foreign interference, and Federalists were increasingly fearful that foreign sympathizers, particularly among the growing immigrant population, could undermine the nation's stability. Many in the Federalist Party, led by figures like Alexander Hamilton, pushed for stronger measures to safeguard the Republic from perceived internal and external threats. The Alien and Sedition Acts were the result of these fears, and although Adams initially hesitated to endorse them, he ultimately agreed to their passage in 1798, under immense pressure from his party. The Alien Acts, comprising several laws, gave the president broad authority to expel or imprison foreign nationals deemed dangerous to the United States. They also extended the naturalization period for immigrants from 5 to 14 years, making it more difficult for immigrants, particularly those from France or other potentially hostile nations, to become U.S. citizens. The purpose of these laws was to weaken the influence of foreign nationals, whom many Federalists feared would support the French cause in the event of war. In practice, however, the Alien Acts were seen as an infringement on the rights of immigrants and an overreach of federal power, particularly when it came to the arbitrary detention or deportation of individuals. The Sedition Act, on the other hand, targeted domestic dissent, criminalizing speech or writings that were critical of the government or its officials. This law was aimed directly at the Democratic Republicans, who, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, had become increasingly vocal in their opposition to Adams's policies, particularly regarding the Quasi-War with France. The Sedition Act made it a criminal offense to publish false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government or its leaders, a law that was widely viewed as a direct attack on the freedom of the press and political dissent. As a result, several newspapers that criticized the Federalist administration were shut down, and prominent Democratic Republicans, including Matthew Lyon, a congressman from Vermont, were prosecuted and imprisoned. The Alien and Sedition Acts provoked a fierce backlash, especially from the Democratic Republicans, who saw the laws as a blatant attempt to silence opposition and consolidate Federalist control over the government. Jefferson and Madison, along with others, argued that these acts violated the Constitution, specifically the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech and a free press. In response, they drafted the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which asserted that states had the right to nullify federal laws they deemed unconstitutional. These resolutions, while not widely adopted, marked a significant challenge to the authority of the federal government and highlighted the growing tensions between the two parties. Adams, who had initially supported the Alien and Sedition Acts as necessary for national security, began to feel the weight of their unpopularity. While he believed that the nation was at risk from foreign influence and internal dissent, he soon realized that the acts had deepened the partisan divide and alienated many Americans who believed the laws were an infringement on their rights. Adams's decision to sign the laws, while motivated by a desire to protect the country, would tarnish his reputation for the remainder of his presidency. In retrospect, the Alien and Sedition Acts are often seen as one of the most controversial actions of Adams's presidency, overshadowing many of his other achievements. The laws fueled partisan tensions and contributed to the decline of the Federalist Party, which would never recover from the damage inflicted by their passage. The laws also set the stage for the election of 1800, in which Adams would face a vigorous challenge from Thomas Jefferson, who campaigned on a platform of limited government and a restoration of civil liberties. The Alien and Sedition Acts also left an indelible mark on the future of American politics, as they raised fundamental questions about the balance between national security and individual rights. The backlash against the acts demonstrated the importance of the Bill of Rights and the resilience of the American public in resisting what they perceived as government overreach. While Adams may have believed he was acting in the best interest of the nation, the acts ultimately worked to his disadvantage, contributing to his political isolation and eventual defeat in the election of 1800. Adams's experience with the Alien and Sedition Acts was a sobering reminder of the complexities of governance in a young democracy. Though he had acted out of a genuine concern for the nation's security, the laws were seen by many as a heavy-handed response that undermined the very freedoms the Revolution had been fought to protect. In the end, the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts stands as a significant chapter in the story of John Adams's presidency, demonstrating the fragile nature of liberty in times of crisis and the challenge of balancing national security with individual rights. Part 14. The Election of 1800 and the End of Adams's Presidency. The election of 1800 stands as one of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in the history of American democracy. Known as the Revolution of 1800, it marked the first peaceful transfer of power between opposing political factions, setting a precedent for future transitions in the United States. For John Adams, the election was a culmination of his challenging presidency, but it also marked the end of his time in office. Adams had served one term as president, but his re-election bid was marred by significant political difficulties and growing partisan opposition. Much of the dissatisfaction stemmed from his handling of foreign relations, particularly the quasi-war with France and the contentious Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws, passed under Adams's administration, were seen by many as an overreach of federal power, infringing on civil liberties, and contributed significantly to the Federalists' unpopularity. While Adams had acted in what he believed were the best interests of the nation, the backlash was substantial, especially from Thomas Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party. Jefferson, the leader of the opposition, had emerged as the primary challenger to Adams, positioning himself as a champion of limited government, states' rights, and a return to the agrarian ideals of the Revolution. Jefferson's appeal to voters, particularly those in rural areas, was strong, as he advocated for a smaller federal government and criticized Adams for his perceived elitism and aristocratic tendencies. The political divisions were stark, with Jefferson portraying himself as a defender of liberty and Adams as a monarchist in disguise, seeking to centralize power in Washington. The election campaign became a fierce battle of ideologies, with each side accusing the other of threatening the very foundations of the Republic. Federalist newspapers attacked Jefferson, accusing him of being sympathetic to the French Revolution and radical politics, while Democratic-Republican papers blasted Adams for pushing the nation toward war and curbing personal freedoms with the Sedition Act. The personal animosity between the two men was palpable, and the press played a crucial role in amplifying these divisions. As the election results came in, it became clear that Adams's chances for re-election were slim. Jefferson won the popular vote, but the outcome was complicated by a tie between him and his running mate, Aaron Burr, in the Electoral College. This was due to the lack of a separate vote for president and vice president at the time, which created confusion and led to a constitutional crisis. The deadlock was eventually broken in the House of Representatives, where after days of debate, Jefferson was chosen as the next president, and Burr became vice president. Adams, despite his loss, accepted the results with grace, and the peaceful transition of power from one party to another marked a defining moment in American political history. For Adams, the election was a bitter defeat, but it also marked the end of an era for the Federalist Party. The Federalists, who had dominated the early years of the Republic, were now in decline, and Jefferson's victory signaled the rise of the Democratic Republicans as the new dominant force in American politics. Adams, however, took solace in knowing that the principles of the Revolution, of democracy and self-governance, had been preserved, even if his vision of a strong central government had been rejected by the voters. The election of 1800 would go down in history as the beginning of a new chapter for the United States, one that would see the shift from Federalist ideals to a more populist, democratic approach under Jefferson. For Adams, the election closed a chapter in his political career, but his contributions to the founding of the Republic would continue to be remembered, even if his time as president was relatively short. Despite his defeat, Adams remained a key figure in American history. His time in office, filled with complex challenges, had shaped the future direction of the United States, and his legacy as a founding father and advocate for independence would endure far beyond the election of 1800. Part 15. The Legacy of John Adams and His Place in History. John Adams's legacy is one of complexity, marked by triumphs and defeats, but also by a relentless dedication to the American cause. Although his presidency was relatively short, his contributions to the formation of the United States and its principles are undeniable. His time in office, though often overshadowed by the longer and more politically successful presidencies of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, laid crucial groundwork for the nation's future. Adams's role in the American Revolution, as a tireless advocate for independence, cemented his place as one of the principal architects of the United States. As a diplomat, he was instrumental in securing the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war and established the United States as an independent nation. He also played a key role in the early debates over the Constitution, pushing for a government that would balance power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches to prevent tyranny. His influence in the early years of the Republic cannot be overstated, as he worked to build a stable government in a nation that had little experience with democracy. As president, Adams faced numerous challenges, both foreign and domestic, including the quasi-war with France and the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts. While his decision to avoid a full-scale war with France is seen as a victory for diplomacy, his signature on the Alien and Sedition Acts tarnished his reputation and contributed to the decline of his political party. His presidency demonstrated the difficulties of balancing national security concerns with the protection of individual liberties, and it raised fundamental questions about the reach of federal power in a democracy. Despite his many political battles and personal setbacks, Adams remained steadfast in his belief in the republic he helped create. His commitment to the ideals of liberty and self-government, even when his political fortunes were at their lowest, was a testament to his character. While his time as president was tumultuous and marked by intense partisan conflict, his long-term influence on American political thought and his legacy as a founding father is secure. John Adams's final years were marked by a sense of reconciliation with his political rivals, particularly with Thomas Jefferson, with whom he eventually repaired his relationship. The two men, who had once been fierce political enemies, exchanged letters in their later years, reflecting on the shared journey of building the United States. Their correspondence, spanning over a decade, offers profound insights into their views on democracy, governance, and the future of the American experiment. In the annals of American history, Adams holds a crucial place as one of the key figures in the nation's founding. His contributions to the Declaration of Independence, his leadership during the Revolutionary War, and his time as president all contributed to shaping the United States into the republic it would become. Though his presidency was often marked by political divisions and personal sacrifices, Adams's place in the pantheon of American leaders is secure. As the second president of the United States, John Adams's legacy is one of principle, resilience, and a steadfast commitment to the cause of liberty. While his tenure in office may have been overshadowed by later presidents, his impact on the nation's early years remains indelible, and his role in the American Revolution and the founding of the United States is celebrated as essential to the country's independence and long-term success. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.